leader, Aaron, as well as one of the SIG Architecture members, Brendan, still on planes back from China. So if there's discussion that they need to be involved in, it might make sense to take some of this over to the release meeting tomorrow, just because I haven't heard from either of them on this topic.
Okay. Yeah, well, let's give it, let's run through the agenda up until that point.
Okay.
And then we'll just have a quick discussion about it and go from there if that works. So as we kick off here, just remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded and will be available online. It is Thursday, November 15th, 2018. I am your co-chair, Mars. And if you want to follow it after the fact, the meeting minutes and agenda are available at bit.ly/sig-architecture. And we'll go ahead and get started. First agenda item is I need somebody to volunteer to be a note taker. They don't have to be great notes, but any notes are helpful. Anybody want to do that?
I'll take notes.
Oh, thank you, Jordan. That's really kind.
Yeah, if this is just
Getting some ambient noise from somewhere.
Patrick, can you please mute?
There we are. Okay. Next up on the agenda is a ceremonial unhold on our charter. I went through and made sure that the last comments were addressed, were good with LG teams across the board and approved. Any final nits before we merge this thing? Going once, going twice, and unhold. And I'm going to watch this because this always feels so nice to see things happening. All right. And while that is merging, we'll continue. So, Michael Squared, you're up.
Hi, everybody. So me and Patrick, the other co-chair for SIG Windows, are here. So we've had a lively discussion yesterday, and I see Brian is here as well, around the SIG Windows and the eligibility for going with the stable designation in 1.13. There's like 2 or 3 different things that were mentioned in the thread, and I want to concentrate very specifically into what's the general availability bar that you can have for Kubernetes for adding a new feature. In this case, it's an optional feature, but it is a major feature of Kubernetes. So I'm going to start from the list that Brian started, right? So there has to be adequate non-flaky tests enabled as part of the release blocking suite. The second one was reliability needs to be high. And I think that the way we measure reliability to a certain extent in the Kubernetes community is using those tests that need to be passing and have the repeatability around them being green. There has to be adequate end user and admin documentation. And then the last one is compatibility can be broken for existing users, clusters, both for today as well as moving forward. When we kind of look at that list, I'm going to start from the bottom because that's the easiest to address. So we're not breaking compatibility. You know, there's an optional feature. Existing apps will continue to work. Moving forward, we're going to continue maintaining our support for Windows. There's no real big API changes here, so we don't have to be as concerned as other features that are primarily API driven, or they introduce significant changes to the API. And on the topic of documentation, we are actually, that's in our to-do list. We are going to do it. We're going to have good documentation when we exit in 1.13. And we've shown that in the past, both in our beta release and our alpha, that we actually pulled through for the documentation. We know we're behind now, so there's no visible docs that someone can read. But the docs deadline was the 19th, if I'm not mistaken, and our goal was to actually have something out there for reviewing and start approvals by then. So that kind of takes care of the last couple of bullet points, and I want to come down to the test. Any questions on those before we get down to the tests?
I would say that part of that list is not complete. I think the
Okay.
community needs a reproducible ways to deploy this type of environment, right? Because right now there's no documented means by which that I'm aware of that actually outlines for an independent consumer to be able to reproduce an environment or support of any testing that is also missing, right? So that piece needs to be there as well.
Yeah, so there are two different documents available on that. Actually, there's more than two, but the ones that we're using for regular testing right now, one of them is from Peter Horniak, who has updated the scripts that are already in Tree to be able to build a cluster on GCE. And then the other placeholder that we have in the documentation links out to, of course, a similar project on ACS called ACS Engine that creates a cluster on Azure. So both of those are what's used in automation, and we have people using those for proof of concept and test deployments today on the current, version 11, 12, and 13 alpha release.
But there's no automated deployment as part of the CI signal from test infra to reproduce these environments that I'm aware of.
That will be merged today. And so that PR's been open for 3 months. And I just had a meeting with the on-call person at 10 o'clock Pacific. They wanted a few more changes on it. Someone is coding those up as we speak.
Could we have a link to that particular PR in the docs?
Yeah, it should already be there, but I'll paste in the chat window.
So my biggest concern here is, from a SIG cluster lifecycle perspective, is there are many tools to deploy clusters, right? And we have not been consulted on any of this at all. So when people come to us wanting to deploy Windows clusters, we need to be able to point them in a canonical location that says, these are the tools you can use, these are the things that are supported, and these are the things that are not supported.
Yeah, and so that's why in that documentation that we're working on, we're linking to the stuff that's available from the cloud providers that can set this up. I mean, we're not asking people to use a specific tool like KubeADM or one of the existing ones that's there. We're asking people to work with their distro vendor on that, and we've got two different examples already there.
But this is what people will do.
We also have OpenShift.
So here's the problem. This is what people will do. They will say a feature is GA. They will use all the tools to try and understand to deploy that feature. And unless the standard patterns exist across these tools, and these other tools have bought into them, like whether or not you're going to use taints and tolerations across all the different deployment mechanisms, people will try it and they will come to us asking the questions. Right?
And you send them back to us. Send them back to SIG Windows.
Yeah, but the problem is like no one has been consulted on a CAP that says this is the policy that we are going to do, this is the promotion, and here's the dates and the time windows. At least no one from SIG Cluster Lifecycle has.
So Michael, do you want to take that?
So Tim, I'm not sure. So what's your question here? That we haven't come to SIG Cluster Lifecycle to have a discussion around how Windows is getting onboarded into the bigger Kubernetes umbrella?
To understand that people will use a set of tools, and to make sure that documentation is also clear and the expectations are clear for the deployment patterns that will exist. So that way it's clearly understood from other parties who are basically the ones who get all the filter for when things go wrong, that they have a routing plan as well as have had buy-in or say in some of the pieces, so that way they can actually make changes in other tools if they need to, right? So that way it's clear that the support for this feature over time is fully vetted by the community.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. So we haven't had that discussion, right? So, I mean, you guys were aware that we're working on Windows, right? So, I mean, we went beta last year and, but yes, we didn't come to SIG Cluster Lifecycle and have that discussion. That's correct. But so far, so that's our fault, right? So we didn't do it. But in the past, when we went beta, we had a lot of users trying this, and we have actually a pretty big community on Slack. And I don't think a single one of those guys came to SIG Cluster Lifecycle asking for guidance or support for the.
They have. We've actually said that we don't support heterogeneous clusters, and we've said that.
and that might be fine, and we've heard that, but I don't think, when these guys need support, they've come to our SIG and to our Slack channel, and they've gotten that support. So I understand that we'll work with you guys to support hybrid environments and kind of smooth that support statement from a Kubernetes community standpoint. But I'm not as worried about customers having trouble and not finding the right place to get support or how to figure things out. They'll come to us. I also have one more thing to add to what Patrick said. Yes, we have something for GKE and Azure for how to deploy Kubernetes clusters with Windows nodes. We also have an on-prem with OVN, OVS, and Ansible scripts that are documented, and they are very well tested by one of the teams that's working on SIG Windows that allow you to produce a Kubernetes cluster with OVN, OVS as the networking backbone.
Where's the KEP for all of this?
Yeah, we don't have one of those. Patrick, I guess, started one, but we haven't.
Well, no, I don't have a KEP for SIG cluster lifecycle. I mean, that is a new ask that came up after. I mean, it's come up in the last week, and
I would say this work has been going on for a really long time. It predates the KEP process.
Yeah.
So if we want to be sticklers about it, the KEP process still says it's optional in the documentation for the KEP process. So.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that, like, here's my major concern and my beef with all of this. That we do get questions, we do have to route them, and we say it's unsupported, but it's a G8 feature, so that lends itself to ambiguity from the community's perspective, right? I don't mind doing these types of things so long as that the other SIGs who will be affected are involved. There's other question of, like, artifacts, right? Usually upstream owns the artifacts. What does it mean to have certain artifacts that are not been published yet for the Windows deployment? So, because usually the way all other artifacts are published, they all go through GCE buckets for routing.
The Windows artifacts have been published for the last 3 releases.
So Matt had his hand up first. Can we let him go first, Brian? Is that okay?
We can.
I was just going to ask very quickly if Tim, is there a list of things that we're asking for here? Because I heard, there are some things we don't have, we'd like. Can we kind of maybe form that into a list and see if it's things that we can go get checked off so we can move along with GA? Would that be a good way to do this?
I would agree. I would like that.
Brian?
Yeah, I agree that having a checklist for the GA requirements would be helpful. I'm looking, I'm also trying to make sure that we have the right experts from cluster lifecycle or node or whatever who are looking at this. But, as I've been looking into this the past few weeks, putting quite a bit of time into it, I'm not sure this is beta level quality, much less GA level quality at the moment. Like the dearth of documentation and the test dashboard with lots of red tests, it's completely unclear what the health of this feature is from a user standpoint or a contributor standpoint or somebody on the release team. And the beta release a year ago was not even alpha quality, in my opinion. So given how short this release cycle is and how many people are going to be away for KubeCon and holidays and other things, the risk of this feature is super high, but it just does not meet the bar right now. And my confidence it will meet the bar without putting the whole release at risk is extremely low. So I think right now the point we're at is get clarity on the GA bar and get clarity on what the feature actually can do. And maybe it will be ready in time for 1.14, and we can get all the ducks in the row in terms of the expectations from all the different stakeholding SIGs.
So Brian, where are you basing that comment you made that our beta last year wasn't even alpha quality? Like, where are you basing that on?
I'm basing that on what I hear about what worked with the feature and what didn't work in the feature, and the fact that the level of documentation that exists that doesn't exist now, I would expect to have existed for a beta feature.
We had documentation for a beta feature. We had actually multiple people that were trying it out, and that they actually deployed Windows clusters and within their Kubernetes environment. And we've been talking to these folks for the last 1 year, so that existed. So I understand that you saw that the PR that you have for docs, where we basically eliminated everything and it's just basically outlined right now, like the sections. But our docs existed before. People were using our Ansible scripts. People used our documentation and deployed clusters both on GKE, Azure, as well as on-prem.
The documentation I'm talking about is not the documentation of how to connect a Windows node to a cluster, but it's the documentation for end users that want to understand what should work and what should not work and what are the differences. And from what I hear, there were a lot of things, especially at the beta point, that didn't work yet or didn't work at all like they did for Linux, whether it was DNS or whatever. So it doesn't give me confidence that this is really ready. Like I look at the test dashboard and it's there's a...
And we can talk about the test dashboard, right? So Patrick has some feedback on that, but I know Matt had raised his hand, so I'll defer to him in a second. But when we get feedback like that, it'd be great if it actually gets routed to the SIG. So if you were getting feedback that certain things were not working, I would love to actually hear that. Both me and Patrick, that
yeah, I'm just digging into it in the past few weeks, so I'm collecting that feedback and giving it to you now. I wasn't paying attention when it was happening, so I apologize for that. But a lot of things are going on in the project.
Sorry. Matt, go ahead. Sorry, we skipped you there for a second.
No, that's quite all right. I was actually going to say, I know there's a time block on this. So how do we turn this? I was just going to ask a question. How do we turn this into a list of to-dos that need to be checked off, so that way we can get this to GA?
And actually, the two things are the major blockers here is like tests and documentation, right? And I know that we can actually get the documentation turned around. It will take us like 2-3 days, and we can actually produce really good quality documentation. The only reason why we haven't done that is because we're completely underwater with getting that test infrastructure on test grid and getting all our tests to pass, specifically because there's so much Linux OS specific tests that really wouldn't work for Windows, and we're trying to identify those and eliminate them from the set because they just don't make sense for Windows. And Patrick has been working on that diligently with the team, trying to get that out of the way. So once we actually complete the testing thing, getting the docs out, we have confidence that we can actually churn out good documentation for our users. So Patrick, you want to talk a little bit about where we are on the test? Jace, go ahead, sir, first.
I just want to chime in as putting my SIG release hat on here. I think something Brian mentioned that's really critical in this is this stuff is not really going to have much time to soak. And the fact that this is an abridged release cycle because of the holidays and KubeCon and all that, I'm super rooting for you guys in this work. I think it's amazing what you've done, and it's frustrating because when I think about the release cadence and how important it is to maintain stability before the end of the release, we have to make some really heartbreaking decisions about what goes in and what doesn't, and the impact on the release team and the overall release quality.
And be aware this is an optional feature, right? So if it doesn't get turned on, it doesn't impact anybody. And from the moment the hybrid clusters are not in the mix, you're actually guaranteeing now that the only ones that are going to try SIG Windows are the guys that are going to have a master component in Linux with Windows compute nodes.
No, I know, but what I'm so when I say that I'm putting my SIG release hat on, it's really from a leadership standpoint that when we release a version of Kubernetes, we're making certain assurances to our community, and there's a high amount of trust that we're trying to preserve with the community. And if we stumble and put something out that is confusing or not reliable in some way or unexpected in its behavior, then that can actually undermine people's faith in the quality of our release as a whole, which would be extremely devastating for our community.
I'm not arguing with you on that. I completely agree with you, right?
So that's why I feel like there's a certain amount of diligence and rigor that we need to apply to this to make sure we're good. So I saw Dim's had his hand up, and then Matt. And can we pass?
Yeah, a quick interrupt there. There are no PRs that are pending for the main KK repository right now. But the focus is going to be on the test infra and the docs, right? Michael, can you confirm that?
Yeah, that is correct. That's correct.
There are PRs against the main KK repo for things like add-ons, which I've blocked because I don't understand what the policy is for whether or not we are going to use labels or taints and tolerations.
Right. For sure, I would like to see some documentation on if you turn on Windows clusters and you want to run the conformance, what do you need to what do you need to do to switch off so that the conformance tests will pass, for example, right? That was one of the things that I was looking for as well, even before.
Yeah, and if you remember, that's what Patrick is working on, right? They were trying to isolate the set of test cases that basically would think of this as like kind of three streams, right? Stream number one is you only have a Linux environment, you run all the test cases, everything passes. Stream number two is basically you subset the test cases to only the ones that work on that will guaranteed to work on Windows, and you run them on a Windows only cluster, and those pass. And then you run a third stream, which is a Windows plus Linux cluster. You run all the test cases, and there's a subset of them, let's say X, that may or may not work depending on where they land. If they land on Linux, they'll work, and if they land on Windows, they won't.
Yeah, and so the work on that third stream, we were asked to move that out to 14, pending the discussion with SIG conformance. And so, the workflow that we've been using is the second one for the Windows-only cluster, where we're running the subset of the tests. And that's because all the rest of the changes that we needed for the other scenarios were asked to move out. So just clarifying that.
Yeah, conformance, official conformance tests for Windows are out of scope for now and decoupled from the GA decision. I think Matt is next, is that right?
I think so. So I'll try to make it quick. The two things that pop up and I noticed here were code and test freeze is end of day tomorrow. And I don't think we're going to be able to get the tests into shape in time. That would be my concern. And I'm looking at some of the tests here, and I'm going to put my SIG apps hat on. And I see things like daemon set rolling updates doesn't work, is failing tests. And so I'd really want to see some of these apps things that people expect to be green or a good reason if they're not going to be, they're going to be, I mean, daemon set not having a working rolling update. I don't know that we'll have this stuff fixed by the end of the day tomorrow. And doesn't that mean it needs to get pushed to the next release cycle?
So
okay, that's it.
And I'll speak here. I don't know what Patrick's opinion is, but let's say we actually do get these tests, and we get all these things fixed. So if we're not, and if we have substantial tests that are important and impactful that are not done, then I agree with you guys. We're not ready. But what if we actually do? If we get the test to pass and green the ones that should pass, are we good then?
Well, we have a couple people who want to talk. Don and then Kenneth Owens would be next after that. I can't really hear Don though, unfortunately.
Sorry about our equipment here. So I just raised my hand. I just wanted to use the iCloud. So the SIG cluster lifecycle, it is the last requirement I did. So last year, I think the SIG Windows announced of the beta, and I do agree that's not the beta quality. So we work together with the SIG Windows. So we at the beginning, I think we have like the requirement I did for the Windows container support, not as the actual feature I did to the Kubernetes community, and require SIG architecture and the SIG node and the SIG network and the SIG storage sign off. So that's how I think this is also a proposal. I believe is Patrick also went to the SIG architecture, and this is a kind of agreement at that time. So we are working on, I believe SIG Windows support is trying to add this Windows platform, extended Kubernetes platform, and to include Windows support in the 1.14. But in the 1.13, they only call the Windows container support GA. I want to make that more clear on here. So When we talk about GA, of course, we look after those testing and what kind of feature support. That is a separate. I'm not to say I'm signing off for the GA yet, but I do think about the last minute change our previous requirement, and that's a little bit problem here. Okay.
I mean, so we are basically getting to the point now where we're saying that every SIG node, SIG cluster life cycle, SIG architecture has to give us a green light for us to go to GA. And what I'm hearing across the board is, everybody is coming up with their own idea of the quality metrics that we want to beta and the quality metrics that we're trying to go to GA. Basically, what you guys are saying is that you're not approving. And if we're going to make that as the quality gate for going GA is that we get approval from all those 6 and you guys say no, then there's no reason for us to fight it. You basically would just say, scratch it. I mean, am I hearing this differently?
I think Ken, did you have something you want to add, Ken?
My only thing was I think maybe, so looking at the documentation for all the workload stuff, for the policy stuff, it's a huge amount of documentation to update, including the examples, knowing which ones work. Trying to communicate to the end users what's going to work on Windows and what's not is probably, I think it's a rather extensive documentation update. It's not straightforward and small.
I mean, we're not going to update everything what's not working, right? We're going to tell them what's going to work. Like, we're going to give people the blueprint for how they can actually start running Windows Server containers on Kubernetes and the things that we know work very well and who have been tested. And that's what we're going to start with. It's a V1 feature, right? Going stable doesn't mean that you're fully functional and you're not going to iterate on that later on. It is an MVP. Certain things will work. They'll be able to deploy their pods. Would they be able to run stateful sets? No. We're going to explicitly say we don't support that. Would they be able to use some other features? No, we're again going to say there's certain things that just won't work. Like, you don't have Calico. Flannel host VXLAN doesn't work. There's a big list of things that we're going to say is not supported, but we're going to give them the blueprint for the things that do work so that can actually get started.
Okay. I mean, I just think communicating that clearly and concisely so that we don't get a lot of requests routed to the SIG app Slack channel. We don't get a lot of requests routed, hey, how does this not work? We don't see a lot of issues on GitHub about basically all my workloads don't work. The other thing so if we know that we have a lot of gaps for this feature, why are we rushing it in? Why don't we just wait a quarter and address all the gaps? What's the benefit to rushing it in right now? What does a community? How does it make the community and the project better if we just rush it in?
Yeah, I'll answer that in a second, but Patrick, you were raising your hand.
Yeah. The thing I want to ask here is, I mean, I appreciate all the feedback on all this, and it looks like there's a lot more people that want to give feedback in this process. I think what I'd like to ask from the release team specifically is we need to get a specific list and have a date where that list is closed. No more new work added to that after that. Because to be brutally honest here, I feel like every time I come to this, there are more people creating work than there are people that can accept the work, which means we can never succeed if the target always moves. And I feel that that is a project management issue that we need to get on top of. And so I'd really like some collaboration to get that list crystal clear so we can get this done and everybody's comfortable, because these discussions could go on forever.
Don, and then I raised my hand after Don. So
I just want to clarify, Michael. Earlier, I didn't say I sign off, but I also didn't say I didn't sign off. Actually, there's the discussing at the SIG node, and we do agree, and we need clearly to say what is limited from the SIG node perspective. We do agree. And a lot of on the node perspective, and a lot of it is we are okay, and we want clear documentation and clear tests. This basically we repeated so many times, but I haven't seen those data yet, so I cannot sign off at this moment. But I didn't say, oh, I won't sign off. So I just want to clarify this one, because we do agree at the beginning of the planning half a year ago, we said we are okay with limitation about which container runtime and limitation about which Windows server and limitation of the certain feature. We all agree on those kind of things, but I didn't see those. I did see test, but I didn't see those documented right.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I'm waiting.
I agree with you. There's no documentation, right? We haven't, like, I think, Don, right before you joined, I explained that we've been so underwater trying to get all our tests and migrating everything to TestGrid that we haven't had time to sit down and write the docs. But, docs is like a 2-3 day effort. Me and Patrick, or we can actually knock that out and have really good documentation about what works, step by step. We already have docs on how to deploy this on GCE, Ansible with OVN OVS, as well as Azure. So yes, we are. I mean, I don't want, if docs is a gating factor, then we are actually. I'm a little bit sad about our process and this discussion today. But I do agree that the tests and then passing or not passing is. I consider that a gating factor, and I agree with most of the comments that people said. I don't want the docs to be that. We can fix that, and we have a month. Or not a month. We have at least, like, in a few days we can actually get that out. Yes, Jace.
I'll let Aish go first. Then I'll go after.
Just to clarify, for me, at least from the release team, the longest poll seems to be all those tests. I've not yet seen a full green run. And even though we agree there are no changes pending to go into KK, but if these tests come out to reveal that there's an issue that needs to get fixed, then I'm afraid this will spill into code freeze, which is end of day tomorrow. And also for some documentation, I believe the API reference updates need to go into KK as well. So it's just there are quite a few things I believe will extend into code freeze. That's my biggest concern in taking this in 130.
So we don't want to keep rehashing this over and over again. It seems that we have critical concern from a lot of different folks on the state of the test. Our goal was, we're working as many hours as possible to actually get all those to be green. Yes, you're right. We're not anticipating any code changes, but on the other hand, we're trying to decipher those tests and flip the bit on the ones that should be passing or the ones that shouldn't. Someone asked earlier, what's the goal for trying to rush this? We're not trying to rush this, right? We are, we're always trying to target GA around this time frame, and we've been clear from that from last year. We've announced that on the Kubernetes community meetings. We've announced that, and we talked about it when we went to beta last year. So this is not rushing it. The rationale behind this is that we're actually trying to get users to use it. When you have the beta designation or an alpha, there's a certain class of people that just don't trust it. And now, bear me, I don't want to push this for the sake of just going stable without actually having the stability and the reliability that people should expect. So that's the other part of it, right? Me and Patrick will never be comfortable saying we're going GA without that really passing all the tests and us being comfortable. But having that designation allows more people to use it. Maybe we'll get more people in the community who are one of the smaller SIGs in this Kubernetes project that more people can contribute. We can continue advancing our agenda. Yes, Ryan.
I just had a question that came up in the some of the discussion on the docs and email. What is the state of the dependency on the Windows Server version? I didn't entirely understand the timeline for the release of Windows Server that we believe was going forward.
Go ahead. I mean, either of Patrick.
Yeah. So right now, as of the beginning of this week, and even today, we're still testing on Windows Server version 18.03, which Microsoft is going to support through November. The new version of Windows Server just came out.
Wait. So sorry, just to clarify, that's November of next year?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that's, probably another 3 versions from now in Kubeland. And so we're still waiting on the new Windows Server 2019 to be available on Azure and GCE to support the test infrastructure. It's not there today. It's not going to be there by code freeze, which is why I've said we're willing to commit to that for version 14. We don't have any reason to believe that it would actually require any work, but that's just the way the timing lined up, because our expectation was that version of Windows Server was supposed to be out by the end of October, which was what was told to customers back in September, and that turned out to not line up.
Okay, but there is at least one working version right now that will
Yes.
work for some amount of time, and it should be upgradable to the new version if they replace their nodes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And be aware that on the Windows side, containers and container hosts need to match, right? So that's one of the important caveats of how Windows Server containers work. So it's not like Linux, where
Yeah, so I saw that comment on the document as well. So for each container they deploy, they will need to specify not only that they need Windows, but the specific Windows Server version that container needs to run on.
Yes, and we are, we're gonna provide some best practice on how to use taints and tolerations to accomplish that, and maybe give them some sample code that can help them with that. But that's so. Long story short, I don't want to eat up the whole SIG architecture time. Are you guys all okay with going down the path of saying, should we get all the tests to run green, the ones that should be passing by end of day tomorrow, we can continue proceeding with a GA plan, provided that we complete the docs in a short period of time frame after that?
Well, other than an announcement, basically, what does the GA designation affect about what you plan to do? Right? Like presumably, we need to get tests working. We need to get them in the release blocking suite. We need to get the documentation in place. All of that work seems independent of whether we officially declare it GA or not.
Okay, so I mean, the other side of that, if you guys are saying we don't agree with going GA, irrespective of if the test pass or if you guys have docs by the end of next week, then that we can just call it quits then and say we'll try for 114.
So you wouldn't make
I'm okay either way. I mean, if you guys let us, we will argue all day.
So
I think Brian was asking, other than an announcement, like what concrete changes are we talking about making in the next day or two? So
we are basically having folks that are looking into the tests, tweaking whatever needs to be tweaked, and marking the tests that should never run on Windows, as in like they're incompatible, or the test is testing for things that will never work on Windows, like stateful sets, like one of the things I mentioned earlier, or something that requires privileged containers or something else. Then once we actually finish that list, we'll produce that, and we'll work with SIG release to tell them this is what should be passing on Windows, and look at this, everything is green. And this is what should not be passing on Windows, and as expected, it's red. If we were to produce that by end of day tomorrow, would we still be eligible to proceed down a path of going GA, provided that once that's done with the testing, we will complete the documentation? That's one of the easiest things for us to do. We just have no time to start on it.
Yeah, Michael, that would be too late, right? If you tell us end of day tomorrow, then we won't have any time to do those kind of reviews to see which tests we actually need, but are not passing, right? And if you have to fix that, then like I said, we'll end up in eating into code freeze.
Yeah, and part of
if
my
had this last week, then it would have been better. But I know that you guys are working nonstop and nights and so yeah.
Part of my point earlier, which was all this seems desirable regardless of whether we declare it GA or not. Like if I can't tell if the feature is working from the tests, and that would be a concern even if it were still beta.
Yeah, we completely agree on that. All right, so we're not going to argue just for the sake of arguing. We'll say that Windows is not going to go GA in 1.13. We'll proceed in getting all our tests, passing in test grid, and working with SIG release to identify that. Who's going to take the lead on producing the set of GA criteria for any feature, not just for SIG Windows, so we can actually start checking those off for 1.14? I don't want us to 2 months from now to get into a situation where we actually start having the same discussion.
This is exactly what the KEPS process was intended to address, and that was earlier.
Sorry.
That was earlier inside of the conversation, right?
So what I would recommend there is, Patrick and you, Michael, you had a lot of feedback over the last week, right? If you can turn that feedback into a KEP and say, okay, this is what we know. This is what you guys told us. Is this enough? That would be the kind of KEP that all of us should sign off on, like SIG Node, SIG Release, and architecture will sign off on, and so you will know exactly what to do.
And and one of the problems that we've had, and Patrick alluded to that in the Slack channel, in the chat for Zoom, is that we are actually going to come up with the release criteria, and we're going to document that, and we're going to give every SIG an opportunity to basically greenlight this, yay or nay, and we're going to give people a deadline, because in the past we've been ignored until now when we're actually getting blocked. So we're going to give everybody an opportunity to veto, and it's going to have a time limit to that. And once that time limit passes, you lose your opportunity to veto for us.
Michael, I'm sorry, you can't say that. I'm sorry.
You can.
No.
I mean, if we produce all the documents you guys...
No, the deadlines are mutually, we agree upon that. You cannot force a deadline. This is a community process. I'm sorry, please don't say that.
But you guys are enforcing a deadline on us exactly right now, right? That's exactly what's happening. Why can we not enforce a deadline for providing feedback to the SIG if you guys are approving us moving forward? I'm talking about 114, right? So if in the next month and a half we produce all the release criteria for us going stable, and we ask the individual SIGs to either approve or reject that, why not be able to give them a time frame for giving us an answer?
So that's the KEP process. The KEP process is something that we've already defined. So if you find a spot in the KEP process for a deadline, please use that. If it's not, then that is not on the table.
Yeah, I would also add that in terms of governance and decision making, lazy consensus doesn't work on technical decisions.
Correct.
Because I wish it did, because a lot of things just languish as PRs forever and don't ever get merged because nobody reviews them, or like this happens all the time. And unfortunately, the onus is on the person who's driving the technical work to get consensus on it. And it is sometimes miserable and impossible, but it has to be done, because there's no way we can just tacitly let things drift into GA or into the code base without some sort of thorough review. But I also want to add something. I was going to say this earlier, and there's a whole lot of failure here. The fact that you guys are having so much trouble with getting this in and all that is partly indicating that we need to improve these communication lines, and also just the process generally. So Michael, what I would suggest is to you and Patrick, please be active participants in the release retrospective, and make sure that these concerns get documented and in there, because that's actually the one place where you can get traction on improving these things and make a difference. So
I agree. The problem is we're spread so thin, right? We're a SIG that has like 5 members. It's impossible for us.
And the flip side of that, though, is that a low staffed effort with high impact, like Windows has, is a risk. The fact that there's not more people associated with the effort is a risk. So call everybody in Microsoft that you can, get everybody on board that you can. Like we need more reinforcements on this effort, just generally speaking. I mean, we need reinforcements on a lot of things, but this is specifically something where we need to get more critical mass around this to vet the use cases and to help you with documentation and do those things. Because I think this is an incredibly important effort, and to have it done in a way on such a shoestring is a disservice to the value that you're working on. This is incredibly valuable. So we need to do it right, and we need to support you, and we need to improve the processes around how this stuff gets vetted.
You have our attention, Michael. So for sure, and Brian and other people have spent much time on this already. So that we are behind you to do this. So let's just follow the KEP process and go on from there.
All right, we'll sing offline. We'll continue trying to get our tests to pass green, because that's not going to change. We'll start working on the KEP process for Windows and starting to get buy-off from the different SIGs. Obviously, this is a bummer for our SIG and the folks that have worked hard for this. So it is what it is. We'll live and learn. And I know SIG Release has a hand raised there.
So just one request. When you do the CAP, can you also define the features that you intend to support for Windows as part of GA? Not just, when you do the CAP, can you also define the features you intend to support as part of what the GA product looks like? As in, like, there are requirements like test passing and so forth and so on, but we will support deployment. We will support pod. We will support stateful set. We will not support pod security context. We will not support pod disruption budget or policy. Just so we have a look at what the GA surface for Windows support actually looks like and can compare it to Linux and have an understanding of what it means for users.
Yeah, we'll do that. Absolutely. We'll list what we will support, not what we want. So anything that's not listed is not supported. So we'll do the little bit of the inverse.
Sure, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
Just to kind of circle back to what Tim St. Clair said at the very beginning too, the SIGs that are kind of on the front lines of user support, like cluster lifecycle, SIG release, the ones that get asked questions about features, SIG apps, making sure that they see that list of what is going to be supported and either are engaged to kind of thread that support out into their SIGs or agree that that's not how it's going to be done and there will be a page dedicated to setup. And like, I think it's just a matter of agreeing on whether that SIG is going to have work to do as part of this or whether they're going to explicitly say, we're not involved in this effort. If you want to know more, go here.
Okay. Well, we'll help with that. First of all, we'll help with the documentation you asked for. And obviously, if something falls outside of the scope of that, we have no problem having the customers redirect it to us. We'll do both.
Great. Michael and Patrick, I'm really sorry that this has been so difficult. And please, for all the people that are working on this on your team, tell them that we really do want to make this better and this process more smooth in the future. We do appreciate the work. We just need to be cautious.
That's fine.
Let's go.
You guys you guys are buying beers at KubeCon. I know that.
Oh yeah, for sure. So we don't have much time left. There's a conformance test for project board review, but I would like to punt on that and actually skip to the chair nomination that I made last meeting for Matt Farina. There wasn't any objection. There was a request for a 1 week soak period, so Matt could turn around and run if he wanted to, which I don't think he's necessarily done. And also a call that if anybody else, is there anybody else present that is interested in taking on some of the work to prime themselves up to be a chair? So first of all, anybody object to Matt being nominated as chair? Okay, that's good. And does anybody else want to raise their hand and start getting on board with the project board management and all the things that we need to do there to start tracking toward a chair? If anybody wants to be a chair, please raise your hand or say something. Don't everybody jump up at once.
Three is enough, Jace, and we can do that over time. We don't have to do it right now. Right?
I know, but I'm just respecting Quentin. Quentin had a specific desire that we don't just throw somebody in the swimming pool without asking.
Right. Yeah, I want to see Matt Farina's face and see if he agrees to be the SIG chair too.
Yeah, okay, Matt, you have to turn your camera on just so we can see this.
I'm okay being thrown under the bus right now. Give me 3 months, 4 months. I might change my mind, but I'm okay being thrown under the bus right now.
All right. You can always resign. I mean, it's a thing.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, so as your first duty as a new SIG chair, could you please do the pull request into SIG's YAML and add yourself?
Okay. I can do that today.
Fantastic. A little bit of housekeeping. We are canceling next week because the US Thanksgiving holiday. And that does not mean that the work stops, however, all of you there. So continue looking at the tagged SIG Architecture things in the repos. If you're feeling bored and want to do some extra stuff for the SIG, there's a lot of just general documentation that needs to be done. And obviously this work with Michael and Patrick on the Windows and getting that GA checklist together, that's something that we probably should think about anyways. And also getting ready for KubeCon, if anybody wants to help with that, because we do have the architecture update. And right now, I don't think we have a list of things that we want to talk about, or we had it for a while, but we didn't actually agree on anything. So yeah, I don't know. Brian, do you have anything you want to add on that, since we kind of skated over that?
Yeah, so the Contributor Summit, is that the update you were talking about?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so there is a talk at the Contributor Summit, which I plan to give about the technical directions for the Kubernetes project for 2019. So I'm starting to put that together. I've asked for ideas for that a couple of times in this meeting. It's my current thinking is an evolution of the architectural layers that we talked about last year. I have an updated perspective on that that's more use case driven. And the improvements that we're making on things like CRDs. So anyway, and the other aspect of that I really want to be clear on is how we can raise the bar for quality and reliability and compatibility in the project in general. And this thing we've been talking about for a while about the project slowing down and becoming more stable and more reliable for all of our users. So those were the main topics. If other folks have ideas, I suggest starting an email thread on the mailing list or reach out to me. When I have a draft, I will send it out, assuming that I have it early enough. But that's the gist of what I'm currently thinking about. And I just want to say thanks again to our new chair volunteer, because the layers diagrams that I started with last year were derived from Matt's diagrams. So I'll be building on those and reshuffling them a little bit.
Brian, please do lay out the 4 sub-projects that we have and that we are, and basically ask for people to show up to help with those 4 sub-projects.
Well, so the topic of the talk wasn't about SIG architecture so much as about the rest of the project. I don't remember if there is a place just for SIGs to talk about what they're doing.
Maybe we can just do it in the contributor summit, right?
Well, this talk I'm talking about is the contributor summit as well.
Okay.
So Ken says there is a SIG update part of that, a shorter segment. I'll take a look at the schedule again now that times have been assigned for everything.
Yeah, I agree. We need to recruit more people on these sub-projects just so we can. Code organization is unstaffed largely right now, so that would be good to get people working on that. All right, looks like we have reached the end of our time. I sincerely appreciate everybody's attendance, and have a great week next week, since we won't see you. And everybody take care.
Bye, everyone.